Hey everyone, I am so excited to take you through this painting. Today we're going to try out some ink and wash. I'll show you a few watercolor techniques to get your colors flowing nicely, and we'll go over some layering methods as well. Now this tutorial is long, but this is one of those paintings where you can easily stop at any point and pick it right back up. So don't feel like you have to complete this entire painting in one sitting. As you can see, the end result is worth the time and effort. Let's talk supplies. So what you'll need for today is water, of course, a paper towel or towel of some kind to dry your brush on, watercolor paper, preferably 100% cotton, 140-pound cold press. This paper that I'm using today is a 5x7 sheet from this Meeden watercolor paper block, and the paper is rough, so there's a lot more texture to it than just a cold press, but they also sell it in cold press, so it'd be a little smoother than this. And then of course they also have it in hot press, which is very smooth. I personally prefer cold press or rough, but again, it's 7x5. You'll need a sketch of your flowers. I have an Imager link to this sketch, so if you want to print it and follow along, you can, and you can make it whatever size you'd like. I always do my sketches on just your simple printer paper first, because I do a lot of erasing and resketching and erasing, and doing that on the watercolor paper leaves marks behind because the paper's so soft. If I'm pressing a little too hard with my pencil and then try to erase it, sometimes the indents get left behind, and after a while it can be difficult to get all of that graphite off if I'm erasing a lot. So I like to just do it on plain paper first, and I ink it so that it's nice and thick and easy to see, and then I will trace it, which I will show you how to do in a moment. Please keep in mind that you can sketch whatever kind of flowers you would like. This is just a reference for you, but the techniques that we're going to be using to paint the flowers can be applied to pretty much any flower that you want to sketch. Also, if you are a really good drawer, unlike me, and you want to go just straight to sketching on the watercolor paper and inking it without using regular paper first, by all means, go for it. Then you can skip the tracing process. The paintbrushes that I'm using today will be this size 6 round by Crimson. I'm going to use this to fill in most of the petals, and I'm also going to use a size 0 round by Crimson a little bit just to fill in these tinier areas. I wanted to have a little bit of a sharper point. These brushes are really inexpensive, but they have the nicest points on them, and they're soft, which is what I want for today because I'm just going to be dropping in pigment. So I find that they actually work really well considering the price. And lastly, I'm going to use this size 6 round Princeton snap brush. I just really love the way that splatter looks with this one. So whereas with these, the splatter tends to come out super tiny, I think just because the bristles are so soft. This brush has a much springier set of bristles on it. And for some reason, the splatter is much more varied, and I like that. So you'll just want a brush that you like to do some splatter with. Paint colors for today, we're going to use Cadmium Orange mixed with some Alizarin Crimson to give it kind of this rusty orange color. And we're also going to use some Cerulean mixed with emerald green for this really cool like teal blue color. And this color palette was 100% inspired by Color Me Water on Instagram. I have been wanting to use orange in flowers, and I never use orange, and I had no idea what it would look like with flowers, so I wanted to see some videos or pictures of people using it. So I just searched watercolor flowers that are orange and her video came up where she was painting a flower with orange and blue, which is a very risky color combination because typically when you mix those together, you get like a brownish color. But it looked so cool, and I was like, I have to try that. So 100% of the credit of this goes to her. She also has a YouTube channel, so I'm going to link all of that below in the description. She has some really beautiful watercolor tutorials. And again, this color palette is totally optional. Choose whichever colors you want. Maybe you want to do pink and yellow or purple and blue. It doesn't matter. Any of the colors that you choose, you're still going to be able to follow along with this tutorial. And the green that I'm using for our stems and leaves is Hooker's Green mixed with some Cadmium Orange. And I did that intentionally because I wanted to keep the palette kind of unified. So I made sure that I had some of this Cadmium Orange in the green, and it just makes they look so much better together than if I had come up with a totally different green that used a bunch of different colors. Also, you're going to want your washes to be pretty dark in value because we're going to be doing a lot of wet on wet. So you're going to have a lot of water involved. It's going to dilute your color. So you want really rich pigment. If you start too light, you're going to lose a lot of the color. All right, let's get tracing. I'm going to show you how I trace these, and you can see I like ripped out these little pieces. That's so that when I tape it to the back of my paper, it just has a spot to stick. So the first thing I'm going to do is use some framer's tape because it's gentle on watercolor paper. You can use painter's tape as well. Just whatever tape you use, test it out. Make sure it doesn't pull your paper off with it. So I just need a super tiny piece of this here. And I'm just going to line this up on the back of my watercolor paper. Just want it to stick on there a little. And I'm going to put another piece down at the bottom. You want to at least have two pieces, otherwise your paper can still kind of wiggle around on you while you're tracing. And that is a recipe for disaster. Okay, so now I have it taped. And what I use to trace is I have this light. This is like a happy light, I think they call it, where it gives off a certain amount of lumens to make you happy in the winter when there's no sunlight, which is a thing here in Michigan. But it gets really bright. So when I lay my paper on it, you can see it's easy to trace. Another easy solution is on a sunny day to just tape this up on a window, and then you could trace it that way as well. There are a lot of fancier methods for tracing, like with carbon paper, I believe. I have not tried any of those. To me, this is just really simple and basic and doesn't require me to buy anything. So this is the route I typically go, but you do whatever works best for you for tracing. So I'm going to get started tracing this with my pencil and catch back up with you later. I've traced my sketch onto my watercolor paper with pencil, and the next step is to add ink. I'm going to use a size 03 micron pen for the outer edges of the petals and the larger details, and then for these finer details inside, I'm going to use a size 005 micron pen. So whatever you use here, just make sure that it is waterproof, because we are going to be adding a lot of water on top of this. And of course, if it's not waterproof, then that black ink will start to bleed into our color. Now I'm switching over to the 005 micron to do these little tiny details. And one tip that I learned from a drawing tutorial by Emma Lefebvre, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that, was that she said that every line you make sure that it's curved. Don't do anything that's perfectly straight, because in nature, all the lines have curves to them. So as you're throwing in these little wispy details here, just make sure that your lines are curved, and that should help make it look nice and natural. I've finished all of the ink details on my watercolor paper, and now I'm going to erase any of the extra pencil marks that got left behind. You want to make sure that your ink is completely dry before you do this step, because it could smear. And I highly recommend using a kneadable eraser like this one. It's just so much more gentle on your paper than using a traditional eraser where you're rubbing it and little bits of the eraser are falling off with it. With an eraser like this, you can just roll it across the paper and it pulls the graphite off really gently without damaging the paper. It's time to paint. I'm starting with my size 6 round, and we're just going to use some clean water. So I've just dipped it in some water and go petal by petal, adding in some color. So I'm going to start up here at the top, and I'm going to paint this petal with just some clear water. And then I'm going to grab my orange and drop it in. Once we have our orange in, I'm going to grab some of the blue and just dab that in near the tips of the petals. So this color choice is very bold. If you are not in a bold mood, please feel free to switch up the color palette. I'm just having a lot of fun tonight with this. All right, and I'm gonna go every other petal because I don't want this to mix in with the one that's already wet. So now I'm going to wet this petal down, and like I can see I have a lot of water sitting on the paper here, so I'm going to dry my brush and soak some of that up, because we want it to be wet, but we don't want it to be a big puddle of water, because that will really dilute the paint and make it harder to control. Okay, now I'm going to grab some of that orange, drop it in. And then some blue. Now I'm cleaning my brush and drying it and just mixing that a little bit. So this is why you don't want your colors on your palette to be too watered down, because you're already watering it down by adding water to each petal first. But by adding that water first, it's going to let our colors really flow nicely. We're not going to get any hard lines, and the whole point of today's painting is to keep it soft. And we're going to go back in and do another layer after these ones dry as well. Throw in a little bit more orange. If you're enjoying this watercolor tutorial and you want to see more, don't forget to subscribe, comment, like. Any kind of engagement you can provide is super helpful to me. I also post YouTube shorts almost daily with mini tutorials as well. Look at this top petal, how cool it looks, the way that these colors are just pouring into each other. That is what is so cool about watercolor that you don't get with so many other mediums. The water itself is just what makes it awesome. All right, let's do this little guy here. Typically in nature, not that this painting really mimics nature in terms of the color, buds are darker than a fully opened flower. So when we go in for our second layer, I'm going to try to really darken up the buds. We'll see if that's possible. Clean brush. What's nice about having this sketched already, let me zoom this out a little bit, is it's kind of like coloring almost. You don't have to think so hard about where every single brush stroke is going to go because the lines are already there to guide you. So it's kind of relaxing in that way. Add this blue now. Every time, you notice I'm dabbing my brush because every time you lift off the brush is when the water takes off. Cleaning my brush, just going to mix these gently. If I mix them too much, blue and orange are going to make kind of a muddy color. So I'm just barely letting them touch. And I'm actually going to lift my paper and kind of let that orange flow. Looks so cool. If you are on TikTok or Instagram, I would love to connect with you there as well. TikTok especially has a really awesome artist community. Everyone is very helpful and encouraging and supportive and sharing their materials and their methods. Just search Studio of Steph on either of those platforms and you can find me, but I also have them linked in the description. And don't worry about filling in these petals perfectly. It's okay if there's some white spaces left behind or if you go outside of the lines a little bit, because we have it sketched in ink and that is holding the shape. So if the colors escape those lines or there's no color somewhere within those lines, it's going to be okay. had too much water on these petals, so I'm just cleaning and drying my brush so that it will slurp up some of that water. Because it was completely diluting the orange, so you couldn't even see it. So again, you want those petals to be wet, but not too wet. Because you still want that color to show. So if you look up here, you can see there's some white gaps. And I think it actually looks really cool that way. I don't know, it just almost gives it like an abstract feel to a very like realistic looking drawing. And I think that's fun. It can also mimic highlights, like places where maybe the sun is touching those parts of the petal. Look at how cool this water just, the blue just carried down like this, all on its own. Like, it's just, it's fun sometimes to not have control. All right, and now the top part. Move this to cover this light so it's not blaring at you guys. This is all dry now, so I can fill in the rest of those petals. I'm going to try and just wet them all down at once, or maybe two at a time. I actually am running low on orange paint, so don't be like me. Make sure you mix more than you think you'll need. Time to mix some more paint. So I'm grabbing more, here's my palette so you can see. Grabbing more of this Cadmium Orange. And cleaning off my brush and going in to my Alizarin Crimson just to get a little dab of that in there, so that it's not such a bright in-your-face orange. It's a little bit rusty. All right, cleaning off my brush, getting some clean water. Finishing off these petals. All right, that flower's done. On to this big middle flower. Oh no, this little bud. Oh no, that little bud is done. I'm adding a little more Alizarin Crimson because I can see that this orange is more vibrant than the orange I was using before. And that's going to make those petals look really different, which I do not want. But that's my fault for not mixing enough paint at the beginning. A good rule of thumb with watercolor is that the more water you have on your paper, the less control you have. And the less water you have on your paper, the more control you have. So when you're painting wet on dry, you have control over where every single brushstroke goes and where the paint will land, because the paint is only going to go exactly where you place it with your brush. But with what we're doing here with wet on wet, the water moves the pigment in a way that's kind of out of our control. The more water I add to a petal, the more the paint is going to run and bleed, and I can't control that. Whereas if I let my paper be just barely wet or like damp, I have a little bit of control. The colors will still blend nicely together, but I have enough control that I could catch big bleeds quickly if I needed to. Okay, our petals are done. So while we're waiting for the petals to dry, let's go ahead and do our stem and leaves. So I need to activate this because it has dried up on me, and I think that is already dark from earlier when I was mixing the colors. So let's just mix some fresh. So this is Hooker's Green, which is a really vibrant green. Like, I rarely ever use it on its own, just my personal preference. I think it's a little too bright and vibrant. But by adding a little bit of Cadmium Orange, it tones it down just enough that it starts to look natural. And because we're pulling in that Cadmium Orange, which is already a color in our palette, it helps this green go really well with what we've got going on already for the colors of our petals. All right, so we're gonna go with that. And then this little spot over here, I'm going to activate. We're going to have a darker version of this over here for some shadows. And we don't have to do too much of that because our ink details really help with the shading. So I have Cadmium Orange mixed with Hooker's Green here, Cadmium Orange mixed with Hooker's Green here, but I'm going to add just a little bit of Payne's Gray, and all that's going to do is just take this a notch darker. So a really good trick anytime you're trying to add shadows to your leaves, stems, grass, just add a little bit of Payne's Gray or indigo even to that green. Okay, here we go. I'm actually going to switch over now to my size 0 brush because these lines are very skinny. So I'm starting with the lighter version of the green. And again, you don't have to be perfectly within the lines. And now while this is still wet, actually, I'm going to dab into my darker green and just drop some of that in for a shadow right there. And then we're going to do that over here as well. It's easiest to do this while your paint is still wet. Either that or you can always go back and re-wet it later. But the colors just blend so much easier on their own when the water's there to kind of facilitate that blending. So while this leaf is wet, I'm going to go in and add some of this darker. It's not quite dark enough to make a difference. So add a little more Payne's gray in there. And my brush is super wet. So I'm just trying to add some of this darker green to the underside of the leaves where shadows could be. Just in a couple spots so that it doesn't all just look like one flat color. All right, going in with the darker green. This stem is super skinny. This one's going to be a little trickier because we have a lot of ground to cover before this paint dries. But it's such fine detail work that you can't move super fast. Like right there, I just messed up. So see, here I just got my green outside of where I want it. So I'm just using my paper towel or my towel and blotting it up a little bit. So it'll still be there, but it's really faint. But that's what I get for trying to move too fast. Okay, so while that is still wet, going in with the darker green right here beneath the flower because there's a shadow there, and then on the underside of these leaves. A little bit right there on that stem too. Going in with the darker green. All right, let's finish this up. Darker green on the lower half of this bud. And right below it on the stem. And if we can squeeze it in, a little on the underside of this here. darker green. All right, and we're near the end here. Dark green. Okay, and now that we're actually on the bottom of the plant, which is going to be the darkest because it's the farthest away from sunlight, I'm adding even a little more Payne's Gray to that green, just to really darken it up so we can darken these leaves up a little bit more. I'm gonna throw in a little more of the lighter green on top because that dried really quickly. There we go. All right, looking good. So I really love this screen with our flower petal colors. I think it works really well. And now we're going to make sure that our flower petals are really dry and go back in and do another layer really quick. My paint is completely dry, and now we're going to go in and do one more layer with just orange to really darken up our flowers. So in nature, oftentimes the darkest part of a flower is right around the center. Sometimes it's reverse, but in this case, to keep it easy and simple, we're going to make the center darker. So to darken up our orange, I'm just going to make a new wash of it with some more Alizarin Crimson. And that will just make it all the more deep. So first making sure I have plenty of cadmium orange to get me started. And adding in a good amount of Alizarin Crimson. Okay, I'm actually going to add one more dab of cadmium orange because I think that might be a little too much alizarin. There we go. We'll see how that looks and go from there. So we're all done with the blue. We're just going to worry about the center. So use your clean water and we're going to go petal by petal again and just make them darker. So I'm just wetting this petal down again. And this time, since the details are not so important, I'm going to wet them all down at once. Let's see how that works. Maybe I'll just do this first half before those dry too much. And when you're re-wetting, you want to make sure you don't rub your brush too much on the paper or you'll start to lift up the pigment that's already there. Okay, yes, this is working great. And I'm not pushing it all the way out because I don't want to cover the blue. It's just an extra layer of darker orange. Anytime we can add another layer, it just gives more dimension to the flower. And I'm just kind of letting it bleed out on its own and stopping it there. I really like the way that looks. And it's going to dry really cool. Sometimes when it dries, it leaves hard edges that actually look really cool with this kind of layering effect. We'll see if we can achieve some of that today. I've also learned that you start at the place where you want it to be lightest and move your brush down towards where you want it to be darkest, because when you lift up your brush, that's when most of the paint releases. And I want it to be darkest near the center, so if I start out here at the outer edge and pull down and let go when I get to the center, most of my paint is going to end up there. Okay, so that flower is done. Now let's see if we can really darken up this guy. So I'm just using a tiny bit of water because remember, the less water, the more control and the darker the pigment will be because the water won't dilute it. So I'm going to try and add a lot of this dark orange in here. Like dipping my hand in my palette, but that's okay. All right, so we're gonna leave that like that. Move on to this big flower here. I'm not even wetting the entire petal down. Like once I get to the blue, I'm stopping. Now here's another thing. On the underside of this curve, it should be darker. So let's not put any water here so that we only are adding darker pigment to this side of the curve in the petal. Let's see if I did that right or not. All right, adding this pigment in. This is just not quite wet enough up here. There we go. Right, we'll wet down the rest of these petals. Again, right here with this curve, I don't think I'm even going to go that far. Let's add in our orange. Okay, looking good. We'll do this little guy here. Again, this is a bud, so I'll see if I can get more of that orange pigment down in there. My water did not go far enough, so I'm just adding a little more water here to help that paint blend. I'm almost out of orange paint again. I am not mixing enough. There we go. Okay, as you can see, we are getting some of those hard water lines, which in this case I actually like. So you can see here these hard edges where our water stops up here. So anywhere that our water went, the orange spread and then kind of created this hard line where it stopped. And in this case, I think it looks very cool. Sometimes I don't want that, but in today's case, I do. Okay, we are just about done here. I'm thinking about adding just a little bit of Payne's gray to the centers here, just a smidge, and doing some splatter as well. So let's let this dry first. You can let it dry naturally, use a heat gun, use a hair dryer. I'm gonna grab my hair dryer. My painting is completely dry. Now, before I do the centers or the splatter, I recently got this gold drawing ink, and I'm a little bit obsessed with it. So this is totally optional, but if you have any kind of ink like this or metallic watercolor paint, I'm going to just on a few petals add in a few little gold details. So what I'm going to do first, I think I might re-wet the petal that I'm going to try it on. Let me do that up here. I'm going to try it on this petal. All right, just nice little subtle sprinkle of gold in there. And maybe I'll add it right here on this petal and a little bit on this petal. All right, we'll move down to this flower. And let's do this petal. I want to put some on the edge of that curl there. All right, and put it on this petal. And I'll do it on these two petals as well. All right, very cool. We'll be done with that for now. I will splatter some on at the end. Just like that little hint of gold. Okay, I'm gonna dry that up. All right, I'm grabbing some Payne's Gray straight off my palette here. So that it's a nice dark value. And I'm just gonna dab it in a little bit and see if I like it in there. Yep, I think that looks good. Just gives it a little extra darkness in the center there. And we let our ink do the rest of the work. For splatter, I'm grabbing my size 6 round Princeton snap brush. Again, just because these bristles are a little springier, I like the splatter that they make. The bigger the brush you use, the bigger your splatter drops typically will be, and the tinier your brush is, the smaller they usually are. I might end up grabbing like a size 12 if I want some bigger drops, but let's see how this one does. So I'm getting my brush good and wet and dipping it in the orange first. And I'm going to dip it in the water again. And I'm gonna try and aim my splatter towards the outside edges of the flower petals, but we'll see, because splatter usually has a mind of its own. Adding more water. Yeah, it's definitely not going where I want it to, but that's okay. It's going all over my desk. I'm gonna risk it and go for the blue. And if the blue mixes with the orange drops, it's not going to be the best, but splatter takes a very long time to dry. So I'm gonna just risk it. All right, that came out pretty good. Now the last splatter I'm going to do, again, this is totally optional, is my ink. So if you have this ink or if you have gold metallic watercolor, you can give that a try. And this stuff is very intense. So I'm gonna dip my brush in there, but then I'm going to grab a glob of water to kind of dilute it. Don't get in my palette. That's good. I don't want to go too crazy with the splatter. So we're just gonna let that dry, but we are done. And you can see how some splatter got on our flower petals, and I actually really like the way that that looks. Look at the gold on here. I love that. It just, again, gives it a looser feel to a very tightly drawn piece. If you don't want splatter on your flowers, then you can cover them with pieces of paper, and then the splatter will just obviously go around that. So let's let this dry and then take a good look at it. All right, friends, our painting is complete. I am super happy with this one. I love the orange and the blue. I love the touch of gold. I love the green. I love the way the ink works with the watercolor. It is just so beautiful. Thank you so much for joining me today for this tutorial. If you have any questions, of course, as always, leave them below in the comments, and I'll be sure to read those and get back to you. And until then, I will see you in the next one.